You are an expensive dinosaur, Keith, and as of 9:05 this morning, your position has been officially eliminated. Chloe Vance did not even bother to offer me a chair. She sat comfortably behind the massive hand-carved mahogany desk in the executive corner, suite on the 42nd floor, her manicured acrylic nails tapping rhythmically against a freshly printed termination letter. She was 23 years old, fresh out of college with a general communications degree, and had been appointed as Executive Vice President of Operations less than 45 minutes ago by her uncle, our Chief Executive Officer, Howard Vance. I stood directly across from her in my tailored charcoal blazer, holding a single flat-packed cardboard desk box. My name is Keith Montgomery. For 7 long years, I served as the principal infrastructure architect at Apexion Infrastructure Solutions. I was 49 years old, and I had personally designed, built, and maintained the underlying digital routing architecture of this entire enterprise from the ground up. Chloe, with all due respect, I said, keeping my voice quiet, steady, and completely controlled. My infrastructure routing code currently manages every single live transaction across our entire client portfolio. You cannot simply eliminate the lead system architect without a comprehensive operational transition plan. Chloe let out a high-pitched, dismissive laugh that echoed loudly off the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Oh, please, Keith, don't flatter yourself. You legacy IT employees love to act like writing server code is complex brain surgery. It is basic maintenance. Anyone with a 2-year technical certificate can press a button and keep a database server running. Your $145,000 salary is an unnecessary operational drain on our quarterly profit margins. We are restructuring this entire division to make room for younger, more dynamic talent immediately. Before I could offer a measured response, she reached forward and tapped a silver intercom button on her desk terminal. Within 5 seconds, the heavy frosted glass door swung open, and a 6'2" uniformed private security guard stepped into the office. Chloe didn't just want to terminate my employment contract. She wanted a public, humiliating demonstration of her unearned executive authority on her very first morning. She wanted the 30 junior developers on the main floor to see exactly what happened when anyone questioned her decisions. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice, and I certainly did not lower my dignity to plead for my job. 7 years of my life, my health, and my technical expertise were being dismissed in less than 3 minutes by an entitled executive who did not know the difference between a local database and a global routing layer. I picked up the pen resting on the desk, signed the standard acknowledgement receipt, and carefully placed my brass desk clock, my framed system patent certificates, and my personal black ledger notebook inside the cardboard box. The security guard escorted me out of the executive suite and guided me directly down the central aisle of our open-plan floor. 30 junior staff members sat frozen in their ergonomic chairs, watching in dead silence as their lead architect was marched toward the elevators like a security threat. I could see the sheer terror in the eyes of my junior engineers. They knew who actually kept the server grid stable during midnight outages, even if executive leadership remained completely oblivious to it. I held my head high, keeping my spine perfectly straight and my expression entirely neutral. I refused to give Chloe Vance the satisfaction of seeing me shed a single tear or lose my composure. What she mistook for passive acceptance was actually absolute icy clarity. As the heavy metal elevator door slid shut, separating me from the corporate floor, I adjusted the heavy box under my left arm and quietly checked my wristwatch. The digital display read exactly 9:12 in the morning on Friday. In my mind, an invisible countdown clock immediately began ticking down. Chloe Vance thought she had just trimmed an expensive line item from a budget spreadsheet to impress her uncle. She had no idea that she had just pulled the master pin out of a $110 million enterprise. The muggy morning air hit my face as I stepped through the heavy glass lobby doors and walked across the asphalt parking lot toward my sedan. Setting the cardboard box on the hood of my car, the sheer weight of the last 7 years came crashing down on me. I had given the absolute best years of my professional life to Apexion Infrastructure Solutions. When I was first hired as a senior systems engineer 7 years ago, Apexion was a struggling tech startup operating out of a cramped office with unreliable hardware and unstable revenue. I was the one who pulled 90-hour workweeks to completely rebuild their back-end routing framework from scratch, converting a fragile local network into an enterprise-grade platform capable of processing tens of thousands of real-time transactions every minute. I sacrificed virtually everything for that company. I lost count of how many nights I slept on a narrow metal cot inside the dusty server room during critical cloud migrations, setting alarms every 2 hours to monitor database logs. I missed my younger sister's wedding rehearsal because a primary transaction pipeline collapsed at 3 in the morning on a Saturday, staying glued to my workstation for 36 straight hours to ensure our client network suffered zero downtime. I put my personal life on hold, neglected my health, and deferred family plans, all because I believed in corporate loyalty. I genuinely believed that if I worked harder than everyone else and maintained silent technical excellence, executive leadership would eventually reward my dedication. 3 years ago, Apexion faced a severe cash flow crisis after an international partnership collapsed. Chief Executive Officer Howard Vance called an emergency meeting in the main boardroom. With tears visibly forming in his eyes, he sat across from me and begged the senior technical staff to make personal sacrifices to keep the company solvent. He sat down with me individually, held my hands, and pleaded with me to accept a temporary 20% salary reduction, taking my pay from $145,000 down to $116,000. He swore on his family's honor that as soon as revenue stabilized, my full salary would be restored immediately, accompanied by a substantial equity stake in Apexion that would secure my financial future forever. Because I was foolishly loyal, I agreed without hesitation. When 3 other senior network engineers resigned shortly after, Howard chose not to replace them. Instead, he shifted their entire operational workload directly onto my shoulders. For 3 full years, I single-handedly performed the jobs of 4 senior infrastructure engineers, maintaining our global platform at a flawless 99.9% uptime record. By the end of the second year, Apexion had completely turned its financial situation around, expanding its client portfolio to 84 enterprise accounts, representing over $110 million in annual contract value. But Howard Vance's solemn promises vanished the moment the corporate bank accounts filled with cash. While my salary remained frozen at the reduced rate and my requests for promised equity were repeatedly brushed aside during annual reviews, Howard quietly restored his multi-million-dollar executive bonus structure. Within 6 months, he purchased a brand new 6-bedroom estate and bought a luxurious Mediterranean yacht that he constantly bragged about during company video calls. Every time I brought up our written agreement, Howard would smile patronizingly and say, "Now isn't the right time, Keith. Be patient. Your time will come." My mistake was believing that silent competence and personal sacrifice would earn me respect in a corporate system driven by greed. They took my loyalty, monetized it into millions of dollars, and mistook my patience for weakness. Sitting in my car that Friday morning, the emotional grief dissolved into a cold absolute resolve. The era of my unappreciated self-sacrifice was officially over. I opened the car door, reached into my leather bag, and pulled out my private black leather ledger, the one record corporate leadership had completely forgotten existed. What Howard Vance, Chloe Vance, and the executive board at Apexion had never taken the time to understand was a fundamental truth of enterprise technology. The prettier a corporate dashboard looks on an executive's tablet screen, the more complex the underlying back-end architecture must be to keep it running in real time. 4 years ago, before Apexion brought its enterprise platform to market, the company was on the verge of losing its initial venture funding due to severe data latency and security vulnerabilities. They desperately needed a custom bank-grade middleware handshake layer, a specialized piece of routing software that acts as the central brain, encrypting and directing every single transaction stream between client endpoints and central cloud servers. At that time, Apexion was burning through cash and lacked the $600,000 required to commission or purchase that caliber of enterprise intellectual property outright. Because I had spent 2 years independently authoring and copywriting a proprietary middleware routing architecture prior to my full-time employment at Apexion. I offered Howard a flexible alternative through my private single-member firm, Montgomery Software Systems, LLC. My private LLC granted Apexion Infrastructure Solutions a revocable, non-transferable software utility license to integrate and run my proprietary software, known internally as the Aegis Protocol. The legal terms of that license were crystal clear, drafted by my intellectual property attorney, and signed by Howard Vance himself during his second year as Chief Executive Officer. Under the precise terms of that agreement, Apexion was granted conditional operational use of the Aegis Protocol middleware. However, because the underlying source code and cryptographic keys remained my personal intellectual property, the platform required a mandatory automated weekly security handshake token to maintain active authorization. Every Sunday night at exactly midnight, my personal developer portal executed an API key verification cycle with Apexion's master servers. Without that manual verification handshake originating from my personal developer portal, the Aegis protocol's built-in failsafe mechanism would trigger automatically. If an authentication handshake was ever missed or formally revoked, the core middleware layer would instantly enter a hard failsafe security lockdown. It would completely sever the data handshake between Apexion's front-end user interfaces and the underlying database clusters, locking down every single live transaction pipeline permanently until reauthorized by the system owner. The entire operational capacity of that $110 million company rested entirely on the Aegis protocol, and the Aegis protocol rested entirely inside my private developer portal. When Chloe Vance mocked me, claiming that anyone with a 2-year technical certificate could press a button and keep a server running, she demonstrated her own staggering technical ignorance. She did not know what button to press, where the core protocol was hosted, or what would happen when Sunday night arrived. I reached down, picked up my smartphone, and opened my encrypted developer portal. The status indicator showed exactly 62 hours remaining until the mandatory Sunday midnight handshake expiration. I placed my Ledger notebook back into my bag, started the engine, and drove home in complete, undisturbed peace. I had been back inside my home office for less than 2 hours when my personal laptop chimed with a high-priority notification. Opening my email client, I saw a message flagged as urgent, sent directly from Chloe Vance's executive address and copied to the head of human resources, as well as Apexion's corporate legal team. The tone of the message was aggressively hostile, dripping with corporate legal posture. Chloe demanded that I immediately hand over all administrative passwords, personal code repositories, system master keys, and private developer credentials to her office before 5 in the afternoon. Attached to the email was a standard 9-page severance and non-disclosure agreement in exchange for surrendering all technical documentation, agreeing to a strict 2-year non-compete clause, and waiving all future claims. Apexion was offering me an insulting severance payout of exactly $2,000. The email contained an explicit bolded warning: if I failed to execute the agreement and surrender all requested technical assets by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Apexion would immediately initiate civil litigation against me for unlawfully withholding corporate property. At the bottom of the message was an attached notice from HR confirming that my corporate health insurance coverage had been canceled effective as of 9 o'clock that morning. As I read through Chloe's desperate threats, I felt a quiet, icy calm wash over me. Her unearned arrogance had completely blinded her to basic corporate law, the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act regulations, and proper administrative due diligence. In her rush to demonstrate executive authority and cut budget lines, on her very first morning, Chloe had committed a fatal management error. She had executed a high-level technical termination without conducting an operational audit or consulting her own legal department. I opened my personal digital archive and pulled up 2 critical legal documents: my original employment contract from 7 years ago and the independent software utility licensing agreement drafted 4 years ago by my technology attorney. Section 14, paragraph B of my employment agreement explicitly stated that any intellectual property, custom software, or trade secrets authored by the employee prior to full-time employment or under an independent corporate entity without direct company development funding remain the sole property of the creator. Even more decisive was Section 8 of the Software Utility Licensing Contract, which operated strictly under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106, governing exclusive rights in copyrighted works. It clearly specified that the revocable license granted to Apexion Infrastructure Solutions for the use of the Aegis Protocol was directly tied to the active good standing employment or consulting relationship of its creator, Keith Montgomery. In the event of an involuntary termination of employment without a fully executed intellectual property buyout agreement, the software license automatically entered a conditional review window, reserving my LLC's explicit legal right to revoke operational access upon formal notice. Chloe assumed she was dealing with an underpaid, vulnerable employee whom she could easily intimidate with legal jargon and aggressive deadlines. She had no idea that I possessed an ironclad contract signed by her own chief executive officer. She assumed that every piece of software running on Apexion's servers belonged to Apexion by default. She had failed to audit system registries, failed to read underlying software licenses, and failed to realize that the core code driving her uncle's multi-million-dollar enterprise was leased, not owned. I opened a blank email draft and composed a response that was 4 sentences long, impeccably professional, and legally absolute. Dear Chloe, I wrote, all company-owned hardware, corporate access badges, and standard administrative credentials were left on my assigned workstation prior to my departure at 9:15 in the morning today. Regarding your request for personal developer credentials, private code repositories, and proprietary encryption frameworks, all technical assets associated with the Aegis Protocol remain the exclusive intellectual property of Montgomery Software Systems, LLC, governed by the Independent Software Utility Licensing Agreement dated 4 years ago. Any unauthorized attempt to breach, bypass, or reverse engineer these proprietary encryption layers will be treated as a direct violation of federal copyright law under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106. Please direct all further legal communications to my corporate counsel. I attached a PDF copy of the signed licensing agreement, hit send, and closed my laptop screen. The trap was set, built entirely out of their own hubris. Before my laptop had even gone to sleep, my personal smartphone began vibrating on the desk. The caller ID displayed the name of Ronald Drake, the Chief Executive Officer of Zenith Core Technologies. Zenith Core was Apexion's largest and most aggressive industry competitor, and Ronald had spent the better part of 18 months trying to recruit me to lead his enterprise technology division. Keith, Ronald said, his tone sharp and perceptive. My legal team just flagged an automated regulatory update in the enterprise registry. Did Apexion seriously just process a termination notice for their principal infrastructure architect? They did, Ronald, I replied evenly, setting my coffee cup down on my desk. As of 9 o'clock this morning, my position was eliminated to trim operational budget. Ronald let out a low, incredulous laugh. Howard Vance has officially lost his mind. He has no idea what he just threw away. What are your immediate plans? I am officially a free agent, I said calmly, and more importantly, the proprietary middleware handshake layer that powers Apexion's entire enterprise platform. The Aegis Protocol is owned entirely by my private LLC. Apexion's operational utility license was just rendered subject to immediate revocation due to breach of contract and uncompensated termination. There was a brief, breathless silence on the line as Ronald processed the sheer scale of what I had just told him. He knew that without the Aegis Protocol routing layer, Apexion was nothing more than an empty shell with a pretty interface. Keith, Ronald said, his voice dropping into absolute business urgency. I am drafting a formal executive employment agreement and emailing it to your attorney right now. I want you to step in as Chief Technology Officer of Zenith Core Technologies. We will double your previous baseline salary, grant you a 20% equity stake in our enterprise platform division, and give you total authority over our software architecture. Furthermore, Zenith Core will acquire an exclusive corporate license for the Aegis Protocol from your private LLC, under your exact terms. Cess the agreement over, Ronald, I said. If the contractual terms match what you have described, I will sign it before 4 o'clock this afternoon. After ending the call, I logged directly into my private LLC developer management portal. With steady, calm fingers, I navigated to the Active Software Licenses tab, selected Apexion Infrastructure Solutions, and flagged the operational utility license as revoked due to employment termination and material breach of contract. I did not execute any malicious commands. I did not hack into Apexion's internal servers, and I did not delete a single line of company-owned code. I did not need to take any destructive action. I simply allowed the natural software architecture and legal contractual terms to run their precise course. The automated security failsafe was already hard-coded into the system framework. Without my personal administrative key verification, the API authentication channels would expire automatically at midnight on Sunday. By 3 o'clock Friday afternoon, I had digitally executed my new executive contract with Zenith Core Technologies. For the first time in 7 long years, an immense weight lifted off my chest. I spent Saturday morning taking a long walk through the park, enjoying lunch with my family, and relaxing through a quiet evening. Sunday midnight arrived without fanfare. Sitting in my living room with a book, I glanced at my personal tablet as the digital clock struck midnight. A single quiet system notification appeared across the dark screen. License terminated, security failsafe engaged, protocol offline. I turned off the screen, set the tablet on my nightstand, and went to sleep. Monday morning arrived with a clear blue sky. But inside the glass tower of Apexion Infrastructure Solutions, a complete operational hurricane had just broken loose. As midnight had passed, the Aegis Protocol's automated security failsafe engaged precisely on schedule. Deprived of its weekly verified authentication handshake from my personal portal, the underlying middleware layer entered a hard lockdown, immediately severing the communication bridge between Apexion's server clusters and external client database queries. By 6:30 in the morning, the first automated system warning alerts began flashing across internal eye monitoring boards. By 7 o'clock, the operational damage was global. All 84 of Apexion's major corporate accounts, spanning international shipping networks, enterprise financial groups, and regional healthcare systems, suffered complete simultaneous platform failure. Every single live client user dashboard froze instantly, displaying a stark black screen accompanied by a critical red system error. Error 401. Master encryption token expired. Connection terminated. At Apexion headquarters, total panic erupted across the technical floor. Junior developers rushed frantically to their terminals, sweating profusely as they tried to figure out why the entire transaction routing engine had suddenly gone completely dark. But because they had only ever managed surface-level dashboards and basic database entries, they had zero understanding of the underlying middleware architecture. When the junior lead engineer, Toby Miller, attempted to manually force an administrative access bypass through the main server terminal, the system recognized the unverified security breach attempt and triggered its secondary failsafe protocol. The core database tables automatically encrypted themselves to prevent potential data corruption, locking the entire platform down even tighter than before. By 8 o'clock, executive phones across the building were ringing off their hooks. The chief executive officers, chief risk officers, and vice presidents of Apexion's top corporate accounts were calling in an absolute fury. Millions of dollars in live commercial transactions were frozen in midair. International shipping containers were stuck at port terminals because manifest databases couldn't authenticate, and institutional clearinghouses were losing hundreds of thousands of dollars every minute the network remained down. Chloe Vance paced frantically inside her corner office, her face ghost white and her hands trembling, as she listened to a top client CEO screaming obscenities through her desk speakerphone, threatening immediate multi-million-dollar breach of contract lawsuits. Refusing to admit her utter technical incompetence, Chloe marched onto the engineering floor and demanded that the IT team perform a forced hard reboot of the primary server cluster. Toby Miller tried to warn her. "Chloe, if we hard reboot the primary clusters without resolving the authentication layer first, we will wipe out the active session cache and corrupt the live data streams." "I don't care about the cache," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking under sheer terror. Just hit the main power breaker and restart the system. Press the button. They executed the hard reboot under her direct orders. The result was catastrophic. The forced restart instantly wiped the active session cache, corrupting thousands of unverified data packets and compounding the operational disaster tenfold. What had been a security lockdown had now become a complete operational nightmare. By 8:30 in the morning, CEO Howard Vance was summoned to an emergency video conference with the board of directors. Board members were shouting over each other, demanding to know why a company valued at over $110 million had completely paralyzed its entire client base in a single morning. "Where is our principal infrastructure architect?" Board Chairman Donald Stanford thundered through the conference speaker. "Where is Keith Montgomery? Get him on the system right now!" Howard turned to his niece with wide, terrified eyes. "Chloe, call Keith. Get him in here immediately." Chloe's voice cracked into a barely audible whisper. "I can't, Uncle Howard. I terminated him on Friday morning. I revoked his credentials and canceled his health insurance." Howard stared at his niece in absolute horror, the color draining completely from his face as the crushing reality finally hit him. He suddenly realized that the entire operational pipeline, the 84 enterprise accounts, and the $110 million valuation of Apexion had never belonged to the corporate entity. It had all been held together by the quiet, invisible work of the man they had marched out of the building 3 days ago. At 9:15 in the morning, as I sat comfortably in my new executive suite, at Zenith Core Technologies sipping fresh hazelnut coffee, my personal cell phone began vibrating frantically on the desk. The caller ID showed 6 missed calls from Howard Vance, 4 from Chloe Vance, and 2 from the main switchboard of the Apexion Board of Directors. I let the cell phone ring continuously without answering. Between 9:15 and 10 o'clock in the morning, my personal voicemail inbox filled to capacity. I set the phone on speaker and played the messages back one by one. The first message from Howard Vance was stern, sharp, and demanding, threatening immediate court injunctions and criminal police reports if I did not return to the office within the hour to fix the server grid. By 9:35 in the morning, the second message had lost all of its arrogant legal posturing, replaced by a nervous, noticeable tremor in Howard's voice. By 9:50 in the morning, the third message was pure, unfiltered panic. He was practically sobbing into the microphone, offering to instantly double my base salary, pay a $100,000 cash signing bonus, and publicly terminate Chloe Vance before noon if I would just log into my developer portal and restore the middleware authentication handshake. At 10:15 in the morning, Howard Vance, the board of directors of Apexion Infrastructure Solutions, and their chief legal counsel requested an emergency video conference. I accepted the meeting invitation, joining the video feed directly from my new CTO suite. When my video stream connected, I was met with a dramatic visual of absolute defeat. Howard Vance sat at the head of the polished boardroom table, his silk tie loosened, his dress shirt drenched in sweat, and his hands trembling violently. Sitting beside him was Chloe Vance, her eyes red, her face streaked with tears, staring blankly at the table surface. Surrounding them on the wall monitors were 6 stern-faced board members, their expressions cold, furious, and unyielding. "Keith, thank God you joined the call," Howard gasped, leaning aggressively toward his desktop microphone. "We are experiencing a catastrophic system emergency. The entire middleware authentication layer has collapsed. We need you to re-enter your master credentials and execute the manual security handshake immediately. We can finalize your new compensation package and bonus structure the second the enterprise network comes back online." I looked directly into the camera lens, keeping my posture straight, my expression unreadable, and my voice completely calm. "Howard, there is no system emergency," I said softly. "The Aegis protocol is operating exactly as designed. My private entity, Montgomery Software Systems, LLC, formally revoked Apexion's software utility license, effective immediately upon my termination on Friday morning. That software license required an active, good-standing employment relationship. When your vice president of operations terminated my employment without executing an intellectual property buyout agreement, the platform's utility rights expired. Any attempt by your internal IT staff to breach, force reboot, or reverse engineer that encrypted protocol is a direct violation of federal copyright law. Under Title 17, United States Code Section 106. A heavy silence descended over the conference call. Board Chairman Donald Stanford, who controlled 60% of the firm's voting shares, leaned forward into his camera. "Howard," Chairman Stanford rasped, his voice dripping with anger. "Did you or did you not verify that our corporate entity owned the underlying intellectual property of our primary operating framework?" Howard stumbled over his words, stammering incoherently into the speakerphone. We assumed the standard employment contract covered all technical output produced by senior architecture staff." "You assumed?" Chairman Stanford thundered, cutting him off cleanly. He turned his harsh gaze back to my video feed. "Mr. Montgomery, what will it take to license the Aegis protocol back to Apexion on an emergency basis right now?" "Name your terms. It is not a matter of price, Mr. Chairman," I replied evenly. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, I officially assumed the role of Chief Technology Officer at Zenith Core Technologies. Furthermore, 3 of Apexion's largest enterprise accounts, including your primary international logistics partner, have already exercised their emergency contract cancellation clauses due to today's catastrophic service outage. They have executed multi-year enterprise agreements with Zenith Core Technologies and are currently migrating their data streams to our infrastructure under my direct technical supervision." Upon hearing that, Chloe Vance completely broke down, bursting into loud, hysterical crying. "He sabotaged us!" Chloe shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at the video camera. "He planned this entire collapse. He held our company hostage on purpose. He should be arrested and prosecuted." Chairman Stanford slammed his fist onto the boardroom table so hard the audio feed distorted. "Silence, Chloe," he thundered. "You marched our principal architect out of the building on Friday morning to save pennies on a budget spreadsheet without conducting a technical audit or reading a single software license contract. You destroyed this enterprise's entire operational capability in less than 72 hours. Chairman Stanford turned to Howard and commanded, "Howard, escort your niece out of the building immediately. Her employment is terminated." Effective this second, Howard looked at me through the screen with hollow, completely broken eyes. "Keith, please. We will pay you whatever you want. $500,000, equity, anything. Please don't do this to us." I looked Howard Vance in the eye for the final time. "3 years ago, Howard, I took a 20% pay cut to keep your company alive. I gave you 7 years of my life and trusted your personal promise that my loyalty would be rewarded. You forgot that loyalty is a two-way street. You chose greed and nepotism over technical competence, and now you must live with the natural consequences of that choice." Without waiting for a response, I reached out, clicked the red disconnect button on my monitor, and ended the call forever. By the end of that fateful week, the total operational fallout for Apexion Infrastructure Solutions was swift, absolute, and entirely irreversible. Deprived of the Aegis protocol middleware layer and utterly incapable of reverse engineering, the complex cryptographic architecture without my master source keys, Apexion's core enterprise platform remained completely dark for 4 consecutive business days, facing hundreds of millions of dollars in pending breach of contract lawsuits, massive regulatory fines, and toxic industry publicity. Over 80% of Apexion's enterprise account portfolio officially canceled their service agreements by Thursday afternoon. The company's financial valuation collapsed overnight, forcing the board of directors to immediately halt public stock trading, file for emergency corporate insolvency, and initiate a forced asset liquidation sale to cover their staggering legal liabilities. The personal fallout for corporate leadership was equally swift and unforgiving. Howard Vance was stripped of all executive privileges and ousted by the board of directors in total disgrace. He now faces multiple personal liability lawsuits from primary institutional investors for gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. Chloe Vance's brief, disastrous tenure as Executive Vice President of Operations quickly became a notorious cautionary story across corporate management circles. Her professional reputation within the technology and software engineering sector was permanently destroyed. guaranteeing that no reputable enterprise firm would ever offer her a management position again. Meanwhile, inside the sunlit executive offices of Zenith Core Technologies, our operational transition was executed with textbook precision. Over the next 30 days, my engineering team and I successfully onboarded 62 of the former Apexion enterprise accounts, seamlessly integrating their live transaction data streams into our newly expanded platform architecture powered directly by the Aegis protocol. Under our new enterprise licensing agreement, my personal LLC received substantial quarterly royalty payments for the software's use, securing my financial independence permanently. Zenith Core Technologies instantly solidified its position as the undisputed market leader in enterprise infrastructure software, doubling its annual contract value across North America. One of my very first official acts as Chief Technology Officer was reaching out to Toby Miller and the two other talented, overworked junior engineers who had sat frozen at their desks while I was marched out of Apexion on Friday morning. I brought all three of them onto my new technical team at Zenith Core Technologies. I offered them starting salaries 40% higher than what Apexion had paid them, full health insurance coverage effective on their very first day, and guaranteed equity grants in our growing enterprise division. They no longer had to endure 90-hour work weeks or unfulfilled promises from arrogant executives who took credit for their invisible labor. For the first time in their careers, they were working in an environment built on transparent leadership, fair compensation, and true technical mentorship. Standing near my floor-to-ceiling office window, overlooking the bustling city skyline, I often reflect on the hard lessons of the past 7 years. The most dangerous trap in the corporate world is believing that your professional worth is defined by the title someone assigns to you or the salary a company decides you deserve. For years, I allowed misplaced loyalty and quiet patience to hide my true leverage, convincing myself that if I just worked harder, slept in server rooms, and swallowed disrespect, corporate leadership would eventually do the right thing. I learned that true self-worth never begs for validation from people who view human effort as a disposable line item on a spreadsheet. Real victory was not about watching Apexion fall apart, nor was it about enjoying Howard and Chloe's public disgrace. The ultimate victory was stepping into my own power, recognizing the true value of my intellectual property, and creating a workplace where competence and integrity are honored. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looked out over the morning horizon, and felt a profound sense of peace. I didn't destroy their company. They crushed themselves under the heavy weight of their own unearned arrogance.